To start this off, I'd like to give a bit of context. This happened 4 years ago. I'm a girl, and at the time this happened, I was 12, going on 13 in just about a month or two. The friend I mention in this story was 14 at the time. My friend Sally, who I was staying with that night, was quite a bit older than me. At least at the time, the 2-year age gap seemed quite big. At 12 to 13 years old, I was just about to start my second year of middle school, whereas Sally should have been about to begin her sophomore year of high school. I met her at the beginning of my first year at a new school. She was older than the other kids in our grade, and was considered one of the more popular kids. I think that was what drew me to her at first. We became fast friends, and before we knew it, we were spending every single weekend together. Seriously, every single weekend. Nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary. It was your typical Friday night. We carpooled to her family's apartment after school. I've always been a picky eater, so when her family had dinner, I decided not to eat with them that night. Instead, I just snacked on a Pop-Tart that I'd stowed away in my backpack, just in case they had ordered something that I wouldn't eat. Something to note is that her family was very religious. I wouldn't go as far as to say they were fanatics or anything, but they didn't allow their kids to watch horror movies or anything that was rated PG-13 or older. I guess it stemmed from the desire to protect them from something they deemed inappropriate. Sally's mother had an irrational fear that scary movies had satanic messages, whatever that means. So when we asked to watch The Purge, her mom obviously said no. After some negotiating though, she agreed to let us watch Hunger Games instead. After the movie, Sally and I went to hang out in her room. She put on some music, and being the age we were, we gave each other makeovers. By the end of it, we were looking much older than just 12 and 14. This part of the night is when things started to seem off to me. You see, Sally wasn't the most positive influence. Despite being my best friend at the time, she was very manipulative and honestly got off on putting me down. She also had this habit of talking to men online and lying about her age. She showed me some texts between her and the man she was talking to. I can't quite give you an exact recount of them, but they consisted of him trying to convince her to meet up with him desperately and just the usual things you'd expect from a creep online. According to him, he was 19, tall, and blonde with soulful blue eyes. Once I saw the texts, I asked if she'd ever actually seen a picture of him. Even at that age, something didn't sit right with me after seeing those messages. She showed me what he looked like, and he was very clearly not 19. This man was at least 40 years old and looked like he lived in his mother's basement. That's when we suddenly got a call from him. Sally answered without hesitation, and when I heard the voice on the other end of the call, I immediately felt like I was going to be sick. "You're so pretty. Why don't you come and meet me?" he asked. Sally said that she couldn't because she was spending the night with a friend. The mention of that sparked his interest very much. He then proceeded to try and convince both of us to meet with him instead. Sally, lacking any common sense, said yes. Thus began her plan for us to sneak out and walk 15 blocks to meet him in a deserted McDonald's parking lot. I really didn't want to go. I was raised on stories of what happens to teen girls who meet random men from the internet in person, but after adamant pleading from Sally that she didn't feel safe going by herself, I agreed. We took our phones with us for this walk. I also had the foresight to stuff a kitchen knife in my bra just in case something were to happen and I needed to defend myself. The route we had to take to get there didn't have very many street lamps, and there weren't many houses either. We were completely surrounded by trees on both sides of us too. When we got to this parking lot, the only car parked nearby was a black beat-up 2000 Toyota Corolla. The car was still running when we got there, and from what we could tell, there was more than one person inside. The man from the picture got out of the front passenger seat and left the door open behind him before starting to approach us. I turned my flash on so I could see, and I noticed he was very obviously on something. I can't tell you what kind of drug it was for the life of me, but his eyes were so wide they looked like they were about to burst from his head. He was jittery and twitching all over the place. I became very conscious of how big he was. Maybe 6'2" and around 280 pounds as well. For reference, my friend and I did not look our ages, even without makeup. I'm about 5'2", and my friend was actually pretty tall, probably around 5'6" or 7" at that age. We were both still significantly smaller than him. The man reached out for us and grabbed my friend by the arm. I went to get my knife as quickly as I could, and that's when I saw his friends getting out of the car. He started to invite us back to his car and offered us booze and drugs, but after seeing me pull my knife and seeing that I was ready to call the police as well, he released my friend. I took Sally's arm and ran faster than I ever had in my entire life. We took the long way home to avoid them finding out where she lived, just in case they decided to follow us. Once we got there, her family was still sound asleep. We locked all the doors, closed the blinds, and blocked him on everything. There would not be any sleeping that night. We were constantly peeking out the window, and to our dismay, that same Toyota Corolla began to circle around her apartment building. Not once, not twice, a full 3 times. I never mentioned any of this to my parents out of fear of getting grounded or being in trouble. I'm 16 now, and they still have no clue. I still get nervous when I see a car similar to the one from that night. As for Sally, her parents never found out either. We both agreed to never speak about it again. Thankfully for her, she moved into a new house just a few weeks after that happened, though. Safe to say, Sally and I haven't spoken in a full 3 years. She was really pissed at me for ruining her night, and needless to say, our friendship did not last long after that. We had a pretty bad falling out, actually, but looking back on it now, I guess it was definitely for the better. So, to Sally, thank you for teaching me a very valuable lesson and making me realize that some people are best just left alone. And to the man and his friends who tried to prey on 2 young girls that night, I hope we never meet again. So this happened a few months ago. I'm a sophomore in college and was traveling down to my hometown over break. I was having some relationship issues with my stepmom, so I didn't want to stay at my dad's house the night I arrived at my hometown. I phoned a friend of mine from high school and asked if I could stay at his place instead. I knew from social media that he was still in town, and I've stayed at his place before, so I knew there would be a place for me to stay if they would still allow it. My friend, let's call him Z, seemed like a pretty normal dude. We weren't like best friends or anything, but we were pretty close by the time we graduated. We would occasionally text or hang out if I was in town and catch up, reminisce on all the times we spent together in orchestra or English class. So when I called, he seemed extremely enthusiastic. Z was a normally very upbeat guy, but this time it seemed like he was getting a brand new car or something. I didn't think too much about it at the time, and he said of course I could sleep in the guest room, so I headed on over. When I got to his house, he was just as excited as he had been on the phone. He was bringing up different things to do like getting high or watching weird movies or playing video games together. Z's parents weren't home, so he really wanted to take the opportunity to smoke. I was pretty tired from the drive, but since we rarely got to see each other, I thought a little bit of friendly bonding couldn't hurt anyone. We played Smash Bros, smoked some weed together, and chatted away for a few hours. It was longer than I wanted, but I was having a lot of fun, so whatever, right? By the time it was getting late though, around 2 a.m., he started to ask some pretty weird questions. If I ever wondered what it was like to kill someone, or if I thought anyone would miss me when I was gone. This, along with some pretty normal questions, like if I had a boyfriend, how my parents were doing, if I was making a lot of new friends at school. It gave me a weird feeling though. I was confused in the moment, but it didn't hit me until after that Z could be assessing me for something bad. The weirdness of it all just made me want to go to bed. We stopped the game and both went into the basement where his room and the guest room were. We say goodnight and I go to my room and get ready for bed. I'm having a bit of trouble sleeping though. Just a bit of insomnia that I'd had for a while. I stay awake for around an hour until I begin to hear some movement outside my room. The walls were pretty thin, so I could hear footsteps walking past my door and up the stairs to the main floor, then back down quickly after. What struck me as odd was that I didn't hear the basement door open, which creaks when it does. The light also didn't turn on either, so I was confused about what Z was doing. I heard him go back into his room, but I had this odd feeling. Just ever since I'd met him this night, he seemed a lot different than he'd ever been before. I decided to look him up quickly on social media and Google to see if there was anything out of the ordinary that I could find. Everything seemed normal at first, until I found his Tumblr, which was linked from his inactive Twitter account that I still had on my Twitter contact list. His Tumblr was, well, disturbing. There were graphic drawings of mutilated bodies of humans and animals, links to suspicious-looking websites I didn't even dare to click on, and texts, posts, and stories about murdering, cannibalism, necrophilia, and torture. There were photos of guns, knives, axes, and various weapons, which after looking closely looked like they were taken in his bedroom. The last post, about a week prior, was a text post from the account saying he wished he could find someone easy to kill like a homeless person. I was immediately filled with dread. I knew he was going to do something. He must have gone up the stairs to lock the door. I packed my things. Luckily, I packed very lightly. I opened this small window at the top of my bedroom's wall. I started desperately climbing through, and just as I was pulling my legs up and over, he opened the door. It was dark, but the streetlight illuminated just enough for me to see he was carrying something long and skinny, probably a knife. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything either. I just turned around, hopped in my car, and drove away as fast as I could to my dad's house. I immediately blocked him everywhere and reported his Tumblr account, but not before telling the police. They said they couldn't do anything, as the guns were registered under his dad, and he hadn't actually had the chance to do anything yet. Nevertheless, I also told my other high school friends not to hang out with Z anymore. Ever since then, I've been creeped out whenever I meet new people. Just the realization that someone I knew so well could underneath be this person who would want to hurt me so bad, who would kill me for no reason. I don't know what you're doing now, Z, and I'm not sure I want to know, but I do hope you're getting help. This story happened quite a few years ago, when I was much younger and much more naive as well. I want to preface this story by stating that I've since learned my lesson. I'm now in a happy and long-term relationship that's taught me a lot about my self-worth. I also apologize for length and any unnecessary details there might be. It's been quite a long time since I've let myself think about this, and it was quite cathartic to write this all out. This started my second year of university. I'm a female and am overweight somewhat. I was very focused on my studies while in high school, so even though I had a large group of friends and went to a lot of parties as well, I always put my school first. I didn't date at all because I saw it as a distraction. And to be completely honest with myself, no one was really interested in me. Most of my male friends were gay, and the straight ones were already dating my other friends. It wasn't until university that I decided maybe it was time for me to open myself up to the concept that I could start dating and maybe share my time with someone. So, about a week after school started, I was heading to our local mall to hang out with some friends and buy some new clothes for the year. I just needed enough nice things for the first week, and then I really couldn't care what I looked like. At this time, I had a license, but I didn't possess a car, so the only means of transportation available to me were walking, friends that took pity on me, and the bus. Unfortunately, as fate would have it, today I was at the mercy of public transportation. I was already on my connecting bus heading to the mall when I watched as a young guy waltzed on. He looked to be a few years older than me and was in quite good shape as well. As this was the bus heading to the mall, the route was quite busy, and my seat was the last seat open. He proceeded to sit next to me. I really didn't pay him much attention as I was texting my friend. When I was finished texting, I did everything I could to not engage with the guy beside me. My phone was an older phone that had a slide-out keyboard, but no internet access or games either. I was able to avoid his stare for all of about 10 minutes until he shifted his weight and I made accidental eye contact with him. It was at this point he smiled at me and said I looked quite beautiful. He commented on how pale my skin was and how pretty it looked contrasting against my dress. I smiled uncomfortably but began talking to him. It was nice to be acknowledged, but I was still wary. I gave him a fake name, Olivia, and we continued conversing. When the bus stopped at the mall, he asked me what my number was, but I told him that I didn't know him that well and I would see him around. I spent the whole day with my friends, and then it was time to head home. My mother had already arranged to pick me up at the plaza closer to our house, but I still needed to take the bus to this location. As I'm sitting down for the ride back, I see that same guy coming onto the bus. I hate to admit that I was actually a bit happy to see him there, and when he sat down beside me, I was a bit flattered. We talked the whole ride, and when his stop came up, he asked for my phone number. This time, I gave him my Facebook instead. He actually laughed when he realized I'd provided him with a fake name at first, and credited me with being smart about it. I'm a naturally cautious person, and my Facebook really didn't contain any personal details, or really even pictures, as I mostly used it to just connect with friends for group assignments or have private chats and messages, so I really didn't feel nervous about providing him that information. That night, he began messaging me right away, and for a few weeks, we only chatted on Facebook. After a few weeks of chatting though, I felt comfortable enough with him to give him my cell phone number and arrange a face-to-face meeting. To my excitement, the meetup went quite well. We met in a public coffee shop and paid our own ways. At the end of this date, we went our separate ways, and I was actually looking forward to seeing him again. We make plans to go on another date, but in about a week or so. Life is a bit crazy around September, and I felt bad for putting off more time together, but he seemed to understand and gave me some space. This next date he planned on his own to give me some time to deal with my personal life, and I thought that was very sweet of him. He wanted to pick me up, but I agreed to meet him at the movie theater instead. We still hadn't really known each other that long, and I didn't quite want him knowing where I lived just yet. I'm really thankful I made this decision. The theater was also in a plaza that was not very far away from my house. We went to see Paranormal Activity 2 in the theater. I love scary movies so much. I actually find them more funny than scary. The entire movie I was laughing, having a grand old time, but when I looked over at him, he didn't seem so pleased. This put me on edge, but I tried not to worry and chalked it up to him not wanting to look scared in front of me when I'm clearly not afraid or something. When the movie ends, he proceeds to explain his plan and why he was looking so dour. He was hoping I would get so scared that I would jump into his arms for protection, and he would be able to use that as a segue into more intimate activities. The dinner plans we were supposed to have afterwards weren't real at all. He was just hoping to take me home with him. I was not okay with this plan, so I faked that my mom had called me and I had to go home immediately. He asked for a ride as he actually had walked over to the theater. I agree, and we get in my car and I drive him to his house. I figured out that he didn't have a car at his disposal and was originally going to come pick me up in a friend's car. He also lived a 2-minute walk from the theater. As I drop him off at his house, he goes in for a kiss. I try to turn my face, but he holds it in place. When he's finished kissing me, he's talking about how much he loves me and is looking forward to spending all his time with me from now on. I was floored and disgusted with the situation a bit, so I laughed nervously and said goodbye. Before I reversed out of his driveway, he tried to open my driver's side door, but thankfully it was locked. My window was slightly rolled down though, and he tried to shove it down with his fingers. When I didn't relent, he proceeded to kiss my window and then let me leave. I was officially creeped out now, and wanted to get home as fast as possible. For the first few days after the date, I felt very uncomfortable with the whole situation. He had started texting me non-stop, and the texts were getting progressively creepier. They started from the typical I love you stuff, then went to I can't wait to marry you, and then our babies are going to be the most beautiful babies in the world. I had only known this guy about a month and he was already talking about babies and marriage. I showed a friend the text and explained the situation. She gave me a big hug and told me her own story. She suggested that if I was really done with him, that I should just break up with him. Just because he made the first move, I wasn't a prude or a tease for deciding to end it. I didn't know him anything. I felt so much lighter after talking to her that I messaged him right away and broke things off. I went to class thinking it was going to be just that easy. But of course it was not. He proceeded to flood my phone with text messages. At first, they were concerned. He wondered where he'd gone wrong and what he did to scare me off. When I didn't respond instantaneously though, he changed tactics and started saying he was going to kill himself and that I was his soulmate. At this point, I had just gotten out of class and was finally able to address these texts. I called him and explained that I just didn't feel a connection. It was better for me to end it early and that I didn't want to lead him on. I also told him that it was not worth killing himself over, and that if he was really feeling that way, that he needed to speak to someone about it who could help him. This started a brand new barrage of texts and voicemails, calling me various terrible names and blaming me for everything. That it was my fault he was going to kill himself and that I was a terrible person. He called my phone constantly, causing me to have to flat out turn it off. This is around the point which I told my mom. She didn't judge me for not telling her earlier. She was supportive that I'd tried to handle it my own way, but she was angry that this guy was acting this erratic. She was a bit nervous at his escalation, especially because she worked in criminal law and saw the worst of humanity on a daily basis. I followed her advice and texted him I was not responsible for his choices or behavior, and that I stood by my decision to break off with him. I told him I wouldn't respond anymore, and if he persisted, I would be forced to contact the police. The last part only made things worse though, and he continued to send me messages about self-harm. When I stopped responding, he turned to threatening me and my family. He threatened he would find where I lived and kill me, and then hang himself as well. I immediately removed him off of Facebook and warned all my friends not to give out my personal information to anyone. I was comforted knowing he had no idea where I lived, but I frequented that plaza often with my family. I was scared he would see me one day and follow me home. The scariest thing was that I only lived 5 minutes away from him, so it was feasible that he could randomly spot me anywhere in our neighborhood. I became a recluse, and the messages continued. They would get more and more aggressive. At first, he was only threatening me, but then he began attacking my family as well. When he threatened to murder my sister, I lost it. I'd had enough, and I was ready to stand up for myself. I called him and waited. When he picked up the phone, he tried to act all sweet. I didn't even give him any chance to try and smooth things over with me though. I told him that threatening me was one thing, but coming after my family now was another. I told him he was a horrible person and absolute filth. I also said a few things I'm not proud of, but in the moment they made sense to say. I told him it was over. I was done with his bullshit. One more attempt and I was going straight to the cops. I reminded him that I knew where he lived, and it would be very easy to find him. I like to think it was that last part that scared him, because after that he hung up on me and never contacted me again. For the next little while though, I was very cautious about leaving my house, and my family avoided that plaza at all costs. I saved all the threatening text messages, just in case, and kept my old phone even when I upgraded to a new one. About 1.5 years later, my friend decided to look him up on Facebook, against my wishes. She discovered that he'd moved away, and I didn't need to worry about a chance meeting with him ever again. She also discovered he had a new fiancée that was basically my exact twin. It was unsettling to know she was almost identical to me, and he had started dating her almost immediately after I told him to finally leave me alone. So let me set the scene. It's late summer, I'm 18 and I had just recently moved 2 hours away from home to attend university. My course was a fairly niche one, prehistory and archaeology, so there aren't really that many students. Maybe 50 total who start the course every year. I have pretty severe anxiety, to the point where I'd be unable to just talk to strangers sometimes, so making new friends was very hard for me. A few weeks into the semester, a guy starts to sit next to me in our shared classes. He introduced himself to me as Michael and told me he was 32. I'm not judgmental at all. I actually think it's really great when people who are a bit older decide to go back to university. But this guy clearly looked like he was in his 40s. It was a bit odd of him to lie about such a thing, I thought to myself, but whatever. I'm just glad I'm not the weird girl who never talks to anyone in class anymore. We talk a bit, and after class, I'm on my way out of the building. I put in my headphones when he taps me on my shoulder. I really hate when strangers touch me. He asked me what song I was listening to. I told him. He immediately goes, "Oh yeah, that's the band with the sexy lead singer who always wears lingerie, right?" I'm just like, "Yeah," in a pretty hesitant tone. What a weird comment to just make to somebody. He continues by asking me what I was up to now. I tell him I'm on my way to get coffee before my class an hour later, and he just invites himself to join me. So we get on the tram to go to the place where I get my coffee, and he keeps recommending me various music to listen to. All heavy metal bands, which I'm really not into and never implied I was. I guess he just assumed because my hair was red at the time. As we got to the coffee place, we order, and he insists on paying for my coffee. As we wait for our drinks, he asks me for my phone number. I don't ever give my number to people I don't know, and the whole thing was already making me really uncomfortable at this point as well, as he started to move closer and closer to me. Again, really uncomfortable, my anxiety brain starts to ring all the alarm bells. He hands me his phone. My name is already in his contact list, just waiting for my number. Panicked, I put it in, pretty sure he's exactly the kind of guy who'd try to call immediately to make sure I didn't give him a wrong number. And surprise, surprise, he did just that. Side note, please don't ever do that. When someone gives you a wrong number, they aren't into you but don't feel comfortable to say no. I go to my uni building my next class is in. He follows me there, too. He didn't even have a class there. He just wanted to follow me around, I guess. I'm about 40 minutes early for my class, but at this point I was so uncomfortable about this guy that I was just happy to have any reason to leave. As I'm telling him I'm off, he goes in for a hug and kisses me on the cheek. I give it an awkward laugh and run off. After this, he'd text me all the time. Just pointless shit and actually some pretty racist, completely random memes. I tried to avoid him as much as possible. I started to skip classes I knew he was in, or coming late so I could get a seat as far away from him as possible, and close to the door so I could leave quickly afterward. After I made a couple of friends by just inserting myself into an already existing friend group, we started to realize he had actually pulled this shit on several people and made many of the students super uncomfortable. He was reported to the uni for being a creep. Of course, they didn't do anything. He also turned out to be a complete nut job when he held presentations and seminars and argued with professors after they told him how wrong he was about basically everything. We have to work in an excavation site for a month in summer, and everyone who worked with him said he was a horrible person. He was ultimately expelled for various reasons, the final straw being when he called the department head a Nazi for not taking him on an excursion that was already full. I did, sadly, see him again after that, when I was sat on a park bench in front of the uni. I hoped he wouldn't recognize me, as I had dyed my hair green by that point. But nope. He walked right up to me. I was absolutely terrified of him after hearing everyone else's stories. A friend had even hitched a ride with him once and he tried to attack her during it. Just said I had to get to my class and left immediately. I get anxiety just thinking about encountering him ever again.